Okay, that's nice. You set it up nicely because you use the words gut volume and food volume and things like that a few times, and that's an important concept to appreciate as well. I actually attended a conference recently where people were talking about satiety and so on, and I learned a few things that I wasn't aware of. Like the long and short of it is, real foods are more satiating than, and I hazard to call them processed foods because I always sort of think is it the right term, but non-food items or food intimates, and these are ultra processed foods essentially. So there's a hierarchy, right? And we've long known about this hierarchy. These are not new concepts. So we call them. Well, let's start with the macronutrients. So foods which are high first and foremost in protein have got the highest satiation properties associated with them. So if you just take people and you put them on a scale, and I've done this with people, right, and measured this. If you are to say do what's called a visual analog scale, you get a ruler, you measure out 10 centimeters out, and you say, how are you on this scale? Point on this line, and you feed them a protein meal, or a carbohydrate meal, or a fat meal, or a mixed meal. Protein is the most satiating of all the meals if the calories are exactly matched.
Yeah.
Right? And then you can do other interesting things like you can make it liquid versus solid, soft versus
And that's
hard.
that's
And
very
again,
important what you
yeah,
said there,
and
because
and and you know what? Again, it's complicated. So I'm sorry I'm getting kind of technical on this, and because I'm getting excited now because you've asked me about this. Because a food like a protein shake, although it might have 30 grams of protein, is not as satiating as a piece of steak, even if the calories are exactly matched. And I know like it's very difficult to get 20 grams of protein out of a steak and not get any fat or collagen tissues or anything like that alongside it, yeah. And some of that is to do with the fact that you've got something which is again processed versus something is hard. But let's do the macronutrients first. So protein's number one. That is the most satiating. Interestingly, there's a biological reason potentially for that, and that when you get a whole dump of amino acids released in your bloodstream, there's maybe a toxic effect for that. So you get a signal to your brain that says, stop consuming as much protein. But that's way off and doesn't really matter that much. The next thing on that list is fiber. Fiber is the second most satiating nutrient. Fiber is higher than carbohydrate and fat. So what that means is if you have a salad, right, high in fiber, different leafy green vegetables and things like that, and protein, that can be a very satiating meal, but it can also be nutrient poor. After that, carbohydrates and fats is kind of here or there, right? In terms of food type, we used to do this really nice experiment with the students, right? Where we'd get them to do calorie matched oranges versus orange juice, right? So both would contain like 250 calorie serving, right? Drink drink some orange juice, eat equivalent amount of calories in oranges, right? So it's solid, peel the orange. And then what you do is you ask them how hungry they are, measure their glycemic index response over 120 minutes, and then you gave them a meal 2 hours later. But it's what we call ad libitum, right? So they can eat as much as they want. And what happens in an ad libitum setting is that if you have the orange juice, you overeat compared to as if you've had the oranges, because the energy release from the oranges is slower, even though the calories are matched. There's fiber in there as well, so you don't necessarily consume all the nutrients. But people get an insulin spike and a sugar spike off just drinking the orange juice. So what ends up eventually happening is that they just then overeat at the next meal. And this is consistent if you look at the literature on this, right? So if you take people and you put them on calorie matched diets of absolute junk food versus good quality food, you can match the calories and they'll stay similar in terms of body weight. But if you are putting them on ad libitum settings, whereby it is eat high quality food versus eating poor quality food, the people that eat poor quality food always gain weight and overeat because there's no satiation associated with it, right? So that's what we're talking about in terms of macronutrients. So macronutrients like that. Harder foods are more satiating than softer foods. Harder foods, so things that have got crunch, much more satiating, right? Which is interesting, right? And that's again probably to do with processing because you're taking a food item and your body's just got to work harder to digest it. So it takes much, much longer to release the nutrients from it, right? And you might not even get all the nutrients from that food item. What people don't appreciate, right, again, is if you take an apple, it's covered in a skin, and within that skin is fiber. So you might say it's got 50 calories in that apple, but because of the skin, you can't access all the nutrients, so you only get about, say, 40 calories from that apple from there because you've not been able to get your enzymes in there to break it all down and things like that. And then you've got another component as well that once that fiber reaches the gut microbiota further down, that sends out additional hunger triggering signals at the same time telling you to stop eating as well. So we've got macronutrient type influences hunger. You've got processing from a hard food item to a soft food item to a liquid food item. That's why, like Coca-Cola, things like that, have got zero satiating properties at all. You feel hungry after you've had some Coca-Cola shortly after it. It's got its use cases. I mean, you might want it in a sports nutrition context, but it doesn't really have much in the way of satiation going on. So those are factors that we have to consider to start with. Now, I've talked a lot there. You've probably got a number of things that you want to come in here and discuss, and there's lots of things I've probably forgotten because I've gotten quite excited. But we can pad this out. So what do you think, James?